From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's Just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
Toxic masculinity.
If you've got a tip for Melissa, an abandoned hiding place you discovered in your neighborhood, something the neighborhood gossip said that suddenly seems possible, how to assemble that brand new end table when the instructions are all in Mandarin. Tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837. Or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. You just might hear your tip on the podcast. And now here's your host, steadily building a stunning collection of designer face coverings, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell.
Yes, those are the dulcet tones of the birthday girl, Shelby May. Her beautiful...
Happy birthday, Shelby.
I think she's 6, and she looks like she's 8 or 9. She's very tall, and she's very mature looking, and she just had her first pedicure.
No kidding.
Her beautiful parents, Brandy and John, are wonderful human beings, and they love podcasts, true crime podcasts especially, and I know they have actually been boots on the ground and done the footwork looking for some missing people in their area. In the Midwest. They're wonderful, stellar human beings, and Shelby is just one of my favorite little souls ever. She also has a penchant for unicorns, which is age appropriate because she's 6 and I'm half a century older than that. So
I'm drinking out of one of your unicorn cups right now. My coffee.
I don't drink coffee really unless it's a dessert drink, and Mark drinks coffee as if it were his lifeblood. So all of the unicorn mugs I've been given end up.
Some of them are really good. This one says that this one is informing me right now that I am 50% unicorn, 50% mermaid, and 100% magical AF. So
you are a magical Air Force.
I'm a magical Air Force, all unto myself.
I believe that was a gift from Megan, host of The Shallow Dive. I'm pretty sure that was from her. I get lots of wonderful unicorn mugs, which I'll just be honest with you, end up being used by producer Mark, because I don't.
And I appreciate it too.
He's very happy with his unicorn mug. So I guess I'm not really talking about him when I say toxic masculinity. So he's not.
Well, I hope not.
He's not toxic. What I was going to say is, producer Mark, do you have a remediation company that you can recommend that we can get rid of some of this toxic masculinity in the house?
I do. Well, no, I don't. I've got recommendations for remediation companies, but they don't really clean up toxic masculinity, because a lot of their employees have toxic masculinity and really can't,
you
do anything about
scrub
that.
Out yourself. Yeah, spray yourself with bleach and hope that you go away. Right.
There are some very nice guys that have toxic masculinity that we just ignore that part of their personality when I'm around them. That's all.
Maybe we can back away from the toxic part. Maybe they can become non-toxic masculinities.
I'll try to set an example.
Could you do that as you're drinking out of your unicorn mug that says you're magical as fuck?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. You're very... One of the things I love most about producer Mark, and there are so many things, is that he is so comfortable in his skin. He does not give lay shit. That's the fancy French way of saying it. He doesn't give lay shit about what you think about him at all. It just
les merde. I care not about les merde.
Please, your French accent sounds like a really fucked up Italian guy, so don't do it. How about that?
I'm going to stop at that now.
Okay, thank you. So the story I always tell that explains that Mark is so comfortable in his skin is that I weep for the future because no one knows how to pronounce his last name. And his last name is Humphreys, and it's the Welsh spelling, which is Humphrys. The British spelling is Ries. So we have, and I've probably told this story before, but we have waited outside restaurants while they yell out, Humper He's, Party of Two, Humperdink, Humperville, at one point when someone said Humper He's, Mark was like, do you think they mean me? And I'm like, no, they couldn't be that dumb. And we waited.
But
they were that dumb. It's like they don't understand that a P and an H make the F sound. It's Humper He's. So when we sign in a lot of places, we sign in under Morgan. Now the things that have happened is that A lot of times people think it's my first name, which is fine. It's a, like everything goes in and out of style, and Morgan is now a pretty popular first name. So they'll say, right this way, Morgan. And I'm like, okay, well, my name's Melissa and I don't like to be addressed by my last name unless we're playing softball and it's on my jersey and I don't play softball. So go fuck yourself. Call me Melissa. That's one thing that happens. But the other thing that happens, it just warms my heart and makes me love producer Mark that much more, is that they'll say, right this way, Mr. Morgan. And Mark just is like, like he doesn't correct them. He doesn't care. Sometimes he'll even call himself Mr. Morgan as a joke.
Well, I'm not a joke. I am Mr. Morgan. Come on.
No, you're not. You're Mr. Humphreys, or also known as Mr. Humperhees. But yeah, Mr. Humperdinck. But yeah, it's just so sweet that he doesn't care. He doesn't give lay shit that you think he's Mr. Morgan. And that's just, he's the opposite of toxic masculinity. He's the perfect balance of masculinity as he drinks out of his little sissified unicorn mug and doesn't give a shit.
The more coffee I have, the more toxic I get, though.
Or the more productive you become.
Sometimes.
I'm going to call it that. So speaking of toxic masculinity, one of the things that, before I actually say this, I do want to say thank you to Tip-Sters Shane, who is our newest YouTube subscriber. And a special thank you to Tipster Hong Lee, who left a beautiful review. One of those reviews that makes you think, these people that are listening are right next to you, sitting next to you. It's like she knows what I'm trying to say. And it came at a time when we'd had a couple of like weird reviews. It's like, oh, so if you would, take the time to rate, review, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you cast your pods, get your pods casted, we'd be really grateful. But if you could, take the time to write a review, that is a huge gift to us, a really huge gift. It helps people find us. And we are having a weird post-pandemic roller coaster of resurgence where, people are finding us, and for some reason we're on the charts, the Apple charts in Brazil. I don't understand. I think it's amazing and wonderful. And
I wish I could play some Sergio Mendes music right now.
Well, what I was going to say is I'm a very big fan of your bikini waxes. So thank you, Brazilians, Brazil people, for inventing the waxing that is very helpful. And
I would say that I'm a big fan of them too, except that would really be inappropriate. So
you didn't say a thing about that, which is great. I didn't hear a damn thing. It's just very fascinating to me that, I'm always just amazed. I guess we're in close to 50 countries now or something. And, most of them are not English speaking, but English is taught in a lot of places. And, I barely can speak English myself. And the fact that people in other countries listen when it's not their first language is just so overwhelming. What a gift to us. But it's, we're like number 150 or something in Brazil. And I'm like, how's that happen? I don't understand, but I'm very grateful for that. So if you wouldn't mind rating us, reviewing us, subscribing, we'd be very, very grateful to that. If you like the podcast, if you don't, there's so many others you can find. You will have no trouble finding something you love and admire, and hopefully it's ours. But if it's not, we get it. So the toxic masculinity that I'd wanted to address is involved in this week's case, which is an interesting one. But I, having worked in the entertainment industry, I get it. I get how it works, how it goes. Things become popular, catchphrases in pop culture and storylines. There's only like 5 storylines, and you just have to redo them with different, details that make it somehow unique. So producer Mark and I were eating dinner last week and turned on a channel, and I was flipping around, and I think I landed on Lifetime. And I was like, oh no. And the title, and it actually premiered on my birthday on June 6th, which is really weird. And it's called Psycho Yoga Instructor.
Yes.
And it is all You would hope it would be.
Well, you were going to change the channel. I said, no, come on. It's called Psycho Yoga Instructor.
Well, I was angry at first.
Yeah, because you thought it was an insulting title. But I said, come on. Come on. It's on Lifetime. It's got to be good.
Oh, well, no, it doesn't have to be good.
Yeah, but there's different kinds of good.
It's so bad it's good. Yeah, it's not. I
Yes.
will be honest with you. It's not even so bad it's good. It's just bad. It's just bad. But I'm probably not going to be the most objective person to talk about this because it angers me greatly. I feel like it's such a cheap way to go if you're a screenwriter and the yoga teacher is the murderer. And I know I've mentioned that before on the show. There are lots of 1-hour murdery dramas that have made the yoga teacher the killer, and it's kind of funny. You know, the first time you see it, you're like, oh, I bet the yoga teacher is jealous. And then it happens. And then, it's the second one, you're like, I don't think that's... And then the third one, you're like, well, this is bullshit. And the third one is the third instance of me seeing a yoga teacher murderer on one of my beloved scripted murdery shows was NCIS. And a yoga teacher was jealous of her yoga instructor boyfriend's fucking around with another chick. And what was so great is she was teaching yoga out on a bluff. It was beautiful outside.
Which happens all the time.
Constantly, I'm always teaching yoga out on a bluff in Malibu or something. And the NCIS officers arrive. And the teacher's like, Karen, would you just take over? So one of her students gets up and takes over teaching the class. And I was like, the day that I am arrested during teaching a yoga class, and I say to one of my students, hey, could you just take over? I think if you're arrested in the middle of one of your classes, I think the class is over at that point. I think so. Maybe it was her toxic femininity that she felt so confident that the fucking murder police were coming to her yoga class to arrest her. And she's like, I'm getting out of this in about 3 minutes. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Karen, you take over. I'll be right back. And it didn't happen. So when I see the title just blatantly out there, Psycho Yoga Instructor, I'm like, fuck you, Lifetime. Fuck off with your fucking bullshit. And I looked, and maybe because it's so new, I could not find who wrote it. I was hoping it was male writers, just because I don't know why. But anyway, I do know why, but I'm not telling you why. I was really hoping it was male writers, and I don't know who wrote it. But it premiered, a week or so ago, and it's really bad on Lifetime. And another fantastic connection, a woman who's married to a rich guy who travels out of town a lot, producer. And she ends up...
Hey!
What?
Hey!
What? I'm just saying.
What are you?
You used to go on a lot of business trips until the pandemic. Anyway, she ends up fucking around with this crazy yoga teacher who is, nutter butter and not a good... There's really not... Some of the back or supporting actors were better than the leads. It was like... Oh no, just really bad, not good acting. But so we're watching it and I'm like, hey, that looks familiar. And one more shot of a different wall. And I'm like, that's it. So I text the owner. The owner's name is Matt, and he owns a beautiful studio in Encino called Forward Fold. And it's a beautiful studio. And, I was like, you fucker, did they shoot Psycho Yoga Instructor in your studio? And he's like, yes. And I forgot to set my Devo or TiVo or whatever it's called and record it and tell everyone it was on. Damn it. And I'm like, look, the movie is atrocious, but your studio looks fantastic. And it's so crazy because I've taught there. I've subbed classes at Forward Fold, and it is a beautiful studio. So whoever the location scouts managers were for Psycho Yoga Instructor, you did a fantastic job.
Oh, and by the way, I just looked it up. IMDb did update their site.
Oh.
And it is a man who wrote it.
Okay, good. I knew it had to be a man because everyone's dialogue was just
Yeah, and a man who directed it.
Toxic masculinity. And the lead actor, who has like a Greek name like Thanos or Panos or something.
It's Panos Vlahos.
There we go, that guy. He's very, very handsome. And I'm so sorry, Thanos. He's not a really good actor. And he had to do a lot of things because he had to be a bunch of different people, because apparently he's got like a fractured personality or something. And he used different accents and stuff. But the owner of Forward Fold is a more handsome version of the lead.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Matt looks like Thanos Panos. He's got dark curly hair and dark brown eyes. He's very handsome. He's taller. Matt is much taller. But it's just so funny that the lead, who's stomping around, Matt's studio like it's his, which is, part of what his character should have been doing. It was just so funny to me that Psycho Yoga Instructor was filmed at the beautifully peaceful, serene, loving Forward Fold studio where this nut job, I guess his quirk is that he, teaches yoga at different studios around the country, befriends a female who might be unhappy in her marriage, comes between her and her husband or family, and then tries to kill her or gets her to kill herself and make it look like a suicide. It's just so bad. And so the woman that gets away and gets back with her husband and everything's fine. And all they did was share. It was almost like it could have been a Hallmark Christmas movie, except it was much more, dark and violent.
Well, he did write a Christmas movie. I'm looking at his spread. One called Love Always, Santa.
Oh my God.
In which he actually also acted in it.
I'm going to cry laughing.
The same guy that wrote this
Psycho Yoga Instructor.
Yeah.
So they shared a very chaste kiss. That's the entire sexy part of it's like a very after a really heated, bizarre private yoga class near her pool, they share this, pretty chaste kiss. And then, she tells her husband, we kissed, that was all. And they have a talk and get back together, and he doesn't want to go, on as many business trips anymore. Producer Mark. And so things are what?
Nothing.
Things are back together and everything's great. And then he breaks into her house when her husband's on a business trip and tries to make it look like she kills herself in her tub. But he had given her a giant amethyst crystal and said, "This is for protection."
Yeah, right before they had the kiss. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what you call foreshadowing.
Yeah.
All you creative writing students out there.
Yeah, here's this big giant amethyst geode that's for protection. And where does she place it? By the tub, so that when she takes baths and candles and rose petals, there's her big beautiful amethyst geode by the tub. So when Freak breaks into her house to kill her or get her to go away with him, which doesn't work, he's got a knife and he's trying to do shit to her, and she's smart, and so she flips the script, so to speak, and she kind of like becomes the domineering one, and she pushes him down in the tub, and this is after he's tried to kill her, and she's trying to like make out with him. She's like, okay, I'll go with you, and then she's like, wait, stop, a little protection never hurt anyone, and she picks up her amethyst geode and bashes him in the fucking head with it. So I thought that was kind of funny, and I laughed at the protection, double entendre. And then her husband comes home at the same time, and then they run back upstairs. One of the things I really liked is that he shows up and grabs a ball bat out of the closet. So that's their only, they're not packing. They don't have guns all over the house. So he has his Louisville Slugger, and he and she walk into the bathroom to find, the tub with some smears of blood, and Thanos Panos has gone out through the window. And the police are there and blah, blah, blah. And then the final scene, I'm just going to, spoiler alert, going to ruin it for you. But if you really want to watch Psycho Yoga Instructor on Lifetime, I say dig in because it's remarkably bad. He is teaching at another city, and he has a different accent. And he is picking out his next potential victim, a woman with giant fake boobs, and she's doing a beautiful pose on the floor, just kind of warming up. It's almost like gymnastics, not really yoga, but she's kind of bending herself in a weird position, and her giant boobs are not moving. And he's walking around in between all the students and with his crazed accent, almost as bad as producer Mark's accent, and saying, "As I was walking into the studio this morning, I saw a green growth coming up through the sidewalk, and I could not tell, was it a weed? Was it grass? Was it a flower? I did not care. It is the next step in our growth."
Ooh.
Yeah.
So he got away.
Yes, and he's moving on to another victim, even though they had...
Wow.
He's changed his name to all these different, like sometimes he's like Giorgio or something. He's got that beautiful Mediterranean look that you can be lots of different nationalities.
Yeah.
So he's all of them. And
Well, it did set up, Psycho Yoga Instructor 2.
Electric Boogaloo.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't hardly wait for Psycho Yoga Instructor Part 2, Electric Boogaloo on Lifetime. I really can't. So I know that was a weird intro, but I had to discuss Psycho Yoga Instructor. It's not always the yoga instructor that's the murderer. Sometimes it's just the fuckface with his toxic masculinity. And this fuckface kind of saw, some punishment for what he did, but really punishment for something else he did. And there's just so much in this case that is fodder for conversation to open the door. I have to just be at peace with what happened, because I sure can't fucking change it now. But this isn't a unique case in the fact that it was a female realtor who was attacked, raped, and murdered at a home showing. In the last decade, more than 20 real estate agents have been murdered, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And a few that are sort of top of mind right now, April 8th of 2011, Ashley Oakland was showing a new home at 2 p.m. in West Des Moines, Iowa. And she's 27 years old, and it was a new community of townhomes, and workers that were doing landscaping outside the townhouse heard commotion. They rushed in and found her lying on the ground bleeding, and she later succumbed to the injury. She had 2 gunshot wounds, and she died on the way to the hospital. The police, her case is still unsolved, and the police, have gotten 600 leads. They've talked to 400 people, and they've received 200 Crime Stoppers tips. But
and still no results.
In 2011, and they're still executing search warrants to this day. So if you know anything about that, obviously let the West Des Moines, Iowa police know. This next one is so heartbreaking because she's such a survivor. But Janice Tisdale, 67, she had an appointment to meet Emilio Maldonado at a $750,000 home. She was going to meet he and his banker in this remote suburban community. And she had shown him several homes in the past, but she had some sort of a feeling. And that's the thing we got to pay attention to, is sometimes how we feel, around someone. Maybe there's a reason we feel that way. So it's a few days before Christmas in 2010, and, they're going to meet at this home. And she, again, knew something, she felt something wasn't right. So she took off all her jewelry and opened up all the doors in the house before showing it to him, so she would have an escape route. So,
that was smart.
I know. And she couldn't really understand why she felt that way. She thought she kind of pushed it down. She's like, I just feel inexplicably uneasy. So they tour the home. Janice Tisdale takes Emilio Maldonado around. And she said the hair on the back of her neck started to stand up. And she's like, I'm just feeling really uncomfortable. And so I was like, we have to go now. So she starts toward the door. She reaches over to pick up the lockbox to put it back on. And he struck her over the head with a tire. It's not a tire gauge. It's a little bigger, but it's not as big as a tire iron. It's apparently truck drivers use it. He had it, sequestered in his boot.
Oh, for God's sake.
And he took it out and hit her on the back of the head. And, a district attorney said it could have broken her neck if he had hit her the correct way, because he hits her, she falls forward and hits her head on a stone on the house. So instead of passing out, she jumps up and she turns around and says, "Why did you hit me on the head?" And she said he just looked at her blankly and said, "I need $4,000.
For God's sake.
So he kept her hostage in the house for 45 minutes. And she's a flight attendant, a former flight attendant. She had retired from that and was selling real estate. And she's like, I was trained during an emergency to keep calm and keep talking. So she kept talking to him. She's like, "Look, go to your car, get a piece of paper. I'll write a note that you did not attack me. My husband will totally believe me because I'm such a klutz. I'm always falling down. You know, you won't get in trouble." So he walks towards his car to get a piece of paper, and she runs around him, and he chases her and tries to grab her. And she said, "This is it. I'm dead. I'm dead." And as she's running towards the road in this very remote new build area, she sees a Honda Civic filled with teenagers. Their windows are down, their arms are out, they're waving, and she's screaming, "Help me, help me, he's trying to kill me." And they slam on the brakes. They all five leave the car. They run out.
Wow.
They get her, and they fucking hold him down. They hold Maldonado down until the police arrive. And he is now serving 60 years in prison for aggravated robbery.
Jesus.
Yeah, I mean,
Now that's a good story.
That's a great story. I mean, but it's a sad story that we even had to say anything like this.
Yeah.
Women make up 60% of the real estate agent population, and they're marketing themselves to complete strangers. You know, you're putting out your business card with your numbers, and I mean, it's terrible. But Janice Tisdale turned it into something positive. She still sells houses, but she never goes to her property alone. She always carries a handgun, and she speaks to new agents in the San Antonio area where she's on the board of realtors, giving them safety tips. And she had 4 kids, but she says she now has 9 kids. So those kids in that car that saved her and kept her safe and held down Emilio Maldonado, she said, I now have 9 kids. What more could a mother want? I mean, it's a beautiful story, but I mean, it's a shame she had to go through this. And the one that's probably most known because it's been covered on a few true crime reality shows is Beverly Carter from Pulaski County, Arkansas. And she was 50 years old and beautiful and sort of the breadwinner in her family. So her husband was actually under suspicion for a while. But it's just so senseless. It's so senseless. So she shows a home to a man named Aaron Lewis, and she's attacked by him. And at first she's held for ransom. She's, duct taped, kept in the bathtub of this home. And, they send voice messages to her family saying, I'm okay, but you need to get money together. And he finally just kills her. It's he and his girlfriend. And he says his girlfriend talked him into it, and they bury her in a really shallow grave right beside the driveway of this house that she's trying to sell. I mean,
man,
he's in prison for life now, but it doesn't matter. None of that should have ever happened. And if you're, in the real estate business, I hope that you do open houses with a partner or a friend or a spouse or a gun or whatever you think you might need, because it is such a vulnerable position, which I had never thought of when I was a kid. And my mother was a realtor the last maybe 10 years of her life. When she got very sick before she passed, she was studying to be a broker because she was very smart, and she wasn't she wasn't a shark. So she never thought of herself as a good salesperson. And I have to agree. She wouldn't lie. She would try and steer people toward maybe a home that was better for them, and maybe they didn't like that. I don't know. But she was very smart and very kind. And one of the things that this story, and maybe it was because of the time, it was in 1978, and it took 42 years to solve this terrible murder. But one of the details of this case was it just smacked me right back because it was a memory that my mom gave me that I was like, oh gosh. So if I thought back, it was probably around the same time. It was probably 1978, 1979. It was my mom's first home that she sold in northern Kentucky. And she came home that day and said, a man just wrote a check for a house. And I'm like, what? I'm like, in junior high, I don't know what the hell that's about. And she's like, it was a $65,000 check. And he wrote the check and handed it to me. And I went to the bank and it's good.
Wow, yeah.
I know. He had $65,000 in his account and he just bought a house because he thought his wife might like it. And it was a beautiful brown brick ranch. And it was and it was like and one of the other things about this case is they described the home that she was showing and they called it a rambling $65,000 ranch. And I was like, oh. And I'm not saying this could have happened to my mom, but this could have happened to any of our moms. Being a realtor is something that you can do and have a family. You're not, tied to a desk 9 to 5. You use your creativity, helping people find the right home. You can, sort of make your own hours. Not really, but, a lot of your weekends are busy with open houses, things like that. But what happened to Carolyn Rose on April 7th of 1978 is just, it should never have happened to anyone, and it shouldn't have happened to her. I'm glad it didn't happen to my mom. And I sometimes am shocked at the number of female realtors who have had either a terrible incident or even lost their lives because they were confident businesswomen working alone, doing something to provide for their family, and a toxic masculine asshole takes advantage of this. This case is interesting because it has some twists and turns, and it's awful that it takes 42 years to solve, but it's solved. So the beautiful Carolyn Rose leaves her real estate office the morning of April 7th, and she's going to show a home in Pine Hill Estates. So it's a new development, and it's a $65,000 rambling ranch. In 1978, that was probably a pretty nice house. And when she tells one of the secretaries at Better Homes Realty, where she is the vice president and manager and director, that she has a home showing at the Pine Hill Estates, they're like, okay. And she didn't leave a name of who she was supposed to show the home to, which, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And when she didn't come back, her coworkers were like, we're worried. We're going to show up. They show up to the home and they find her nude, crumpled body on the floor. Her hands have been bound behind her. She's been raped and she is murdered. And they go next door. This is one of those odd things. They go next door to use the phone. It's a new build home. There's no phone installed. So they go next door to Mildred Swenson. And they say, we are coworkers of the realtor who has the home next door, and we need to use your phone. And she said she didn't really know why, but they said, we need to call the sheriff's department. So it's now like 1:15 in the afternoon, and Mildred is, a little pissed off because she was watching her favorite soap opera, As the World Turns. But she's like, all right, use my phone, call the sheriff's office. But she doesn't really know why. She sees Carolyn Rose's car that's parked in the driveway, and she's like, I wonder what's going on. She leaves her home and lets two strange realtors use her phone because she's Mildred Swenson and needs to know everything, and goes through the open back door and says, I'm sorry I went in there because it almost scared me to death. I wish I hadn't gone in there. I really do. But she saw Carolyn Rose's body on the floor. She said she had to lean against the wall so that she didn't pass out. And she left and quickly went back to her home, where the realtors had called the sheriff's office and said, our coworker has been murdered. And they show up, and they, ironically, one of the detectives also has the last name of Rose. They weren't related, but, he is one of the first responding officers. And they smartly take everything they can. It's not a wide crime scene because there wasn't a lot there. It was an open home that was, not staged to be sold. And they take everything they can, and God bless them for doing so, because it may take 42 years, but they do find their man. And in the meantime, Carolyn Rose is being mourned by a community that embraced her. I mean, she'd worked her way up, to become the vice president of Better Homes Realty. She was a member of the Pensacola Board of Realtors. She was a sorority member of Beta Sigma Phi sorority. She was a member of the Scenic Hills Country Club. She was a member of the Pensacola Chamber of Commerce. All the things you do when you want to have a successful career as a realtor. It's all about, as my sweet husband, producer Mark, says, it's all about relationships. And Carolyn Rose was the kind of person that made great relationships. She had so many people who loved her and supported her. I mean, when you're gone for 2 hours and your coworkers are like, where are you? That lets you know what an important piece of, what an important cog in the wheel.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing. It's not just one person. It's a whole group of people went to the house together.
Yep.
That's pretty remarkable.
It is. I mean, she was very special and very loved. And she had one son, Carl Stark III, and he lived in Georgia. She had 3 sisters. Her parents were still alive. She had, nieces and nephews who loved her so very much. She was a very sweet, popular woman. And, the heartbreaking part of this is that her son passed away 2 weeks before they found out who killed his mother. 42 years later,
wow, that's just horrible.
He passes away, and 2 weeks later, at the beginning of June, they find out who did this. So before they find out who did this, there are other suspects, and interesting ones at that. A man named Robert J. O'Connor, who lived in Queens, New York, was her age exactly 47. And Robert J. O'Connor had apparently been very inappropriate with several female employees at each of the new home centers he had visited, writing bad checks. And that was something that piqued the homicide investigators' interest. I have to say, the Escambia County Police, which have gotten kind of a bad rap lately, I guess there's a whole lot of crap in Escambia County that goes on, and a lot of it having to do with like the naval base, I guess. There's a whole lot of unsolved issues there. And I don't know anything about that agency. I just can tell you, I have listened to a few podcasts this week, and 3 of them mentioned Escambia County. And so when I figured out I was doing this one, I was like, oh no, Pensacola is in Escambia County. So, Pensacola is, I'm going to say it because I can. It's my podcast, and my grandfather had a little bungalow in Pensacola for the first 6 years of my life. It's known as the Hillbilly Riviera. It's the northern part. Is Pensacola almost close to Georgia, producer Mark?
It's the panhandle of Florida,
okay,
right along the Gulf.
Okay.
And yeah, it's very close to Georgia.
Okay.
Yes. Well, so the eastern part of it.
Eastern part of it. Okay. So when I was a kid, we had a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath bungalow. My grandparents did. And, we would take vacations there. And anyway, I haven't been to Florida in a long time, and I'm okay with that. So yeah, Escambia County, I can't say enough good things about them actually in this case, because they traveled to New York to track down this Robert J. O'Connor. They got the FBI involved because it went across state lines. So Robert J. O'Connor, kind of an asshole, but certainly not the killer of Carolyn Rose. But they flew to, New York. The FBI was involved because there's a fugitive warrant on him. He was being held without bail in a Brooklyn jail. And because he did this shitty thing, and because he was in Pensacola at the time of Carolyn's murder, he would write bad checks to home builders saying it was a deposit or a down payment on a house. So he did that 3 different times for 3 different properties in Baldwin County and then one in Escambia County. And all checks were given like different successive dates in March of 1978, and Carolyn was killed in April. So they knew he was there at that time, but he was just this like, I don't know, crappy scammer. I don't even know what to call him. He was just like a crappy scammer. He was a groundskeeper for a recreational facility that was operated by IBM on Long Island. But he would travel back and forth to Pensacola writing bad checks for properties he wasn't going to purchase. Like, I don't know what he did this for, but I love the fact that it took them not that long, literally a couple of weeks, to figure out who they think their suspect is, to look at his airline travel, his credit cards, his car rentals, and try and get information that he is the guy. And it turns out he was not the guy. He was in New York. He wasn't in Pensacola on the date that she was murdered. He was there around the time. He was, back and forth, but he wasn't there at that time. So it takes 42 years later, and every year on the anniversary of her murder, the Escambia County Sheriff's Office would retest the evidence.
Every year?
Every year. And it finally comes back this year to Julius William Hill.
Wow.
Julius William Hill, who was a vagrant who died in 2007 in Victorville, California, at the U.S. Penitentiary in Victorville here. Here's what really gets me. He was serving 30 years for 2 bank robberies. And this isn't his only issue. Even the sheriff in Escambia County, his name is Sheriff Morgan, and no, we're not related. He said the system failed our citizens in this case. Julius Hill committed his first rape at the age of 19.
Oh my God.
He raped his neighbor, and he got a 25-year sentence, but was released after 7 years.
Of course he was.
I'm just going to say this, a 25-year sentence for raping a woman and a 30-year sentence for robbing a bank.
Right.
Does that let you know what is prized in our culture? A bank over a human life and the life of a woman. I'm just going to say it that way. And that's why I was harping on the toxic masculinity, because there's so many things about this case that bother me so greatly. Such a vulnerable victim, a woman who's working her ass off to support her family, and she's alone in a home, and you're a sick fucking predator who takes advantage. You're a vagrant, you're a bank robber, you're a criminal serial rapist, and you're a murderer. You rape your, neighbor at the age of 19, you spend 7 years in jail, he gets out, and the next thing he does is kill Carolyn Rose. Maybe he thinks, I can't leave witnesses. I can't do 7 more years in jail, so I'll just kill this one. But he robs a bank and gets 30 years and stayed in jail until he died in custody.
Wow.
for a bank robbery. For a bank robbery. And then Carolyn's son dies 2 weeks before the DNA results come back, and it's Julius Hill.
If they tested every year and he'd been in the system that long, how come it took so long for them to get a hit?
Here's my guess. I started to say can't tell you why, but here's my guess. They tested different things. They tested what she was bound with, things that were around her.
So they didn't test everything every year.
That is the only guess I can give you. But they did every year review her case, one of the longest cold cases in Pensacola history, and were able to fucking solve it 42 years later. So the only thing that gives me hope about this is my favorite new phrase, which is, we're coming for you, assholes. We're coming for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And look, I have no scientific background. I couldn't tell you DNA from RNA from NASCAR. I don't know any of the initials, but the people, the scientists, the lab researchers who work on these cases, who do this work, it's magnificent and fantastic. And to find out that Julius Hill Jr. lived in the area at the time, and a convicted rapist who had just gotten out and goes to this home that Carolyn Rose is showing and thinking she is a potential buyer. Those people who are doing this work are heroes. There's just no other way for me to say it. They're heroes. And, we're coming for you, assholes. I wish I were really part of the we. I wish I knew more or could survive in a scientific environment. I wanted to be a coroner and work in a mortuary, but I'm terrible at science. And I also couldn't handle the grief. I thought about going to funeral director or mortuary science school. There's a very highly esteemed one in the Cincinnati area where I'm from. And I considered it because I'm fascinated by the human body, by what happens after we die, not necessarily dying in a terrible way by someone taking your life. That sort of, evolved. But I knew I couldn't handle the grief. I would see someone cry and I would cry. And that's not what you need with a funeral director. You need someone who can express compassion. But when you're crying because you've lost someone, you don't need someone crying with you. So that's one reason. But also I'm terrible at science. Terrible. It takes a lot for me to remember to wear a mask when I leave the house. Sometimes I, wear gloves. I would be in a lab and it would be like a really bad Jerry Lewis movie where I would turn around and my sleeve would knock over a beaker and shit would go flying and stuff would catch fire and I'd be fired immediately, or I'd kill myself and everyone else, not on purpose. So the people that are doing this work, the backlog of cases, the testing of DNA, it's magnificent and wonderful, and I'm so grateful. And even though it's the saddest thing that Carolyn Rose, her case 42 years later, it's still solved, and for that I'm grateful. And more cowbell.
And if you'd like to support the podcast, go to patreon.com/justthetipsters.